So what do we have here? North American continent, right? We got Canada and the U.S. This is definitely a 2-for-1. Former Treasury official, everything is disintegrating. And then we have Canada. This is Canada's depression, surging crime, soaring suicides, overwhelmed food banks, and the worst is yet to come. We're going to start with the American side of things with the former Treasury official. Submitted by Rory Hall. When preparing for interviews, Dave Kranzler and I usually go over what we're going to discuss, how to get the show started, and how we will hand off the conversation. It's a good formula that has served us well. In the conversation below, you can throw that formula out the window. Our world, as many of you know, is experiencing massive, unprecedented change at an ever-increasing pace. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, which is that former official, is not only one of the foremost economists in the world, but he also has one of the world's most respected voices covering the geopolitical landscape. The American people, generally speaking, are asleep at the wheel. And now the blame isn't totally their fault. It's not solely on their shoulders, but they do bear the brunt of the blame. The mainstream media does not report what is happening within our economy or the geopolitical arena unless they can spew on and on about the endless rainbows, unicorns, and how America is the greatest and Putin is the devil. No depth of coverage, nothing of real value reported, so the American people are left ignorant and wanting the truth. When you work 2 or more part-time jobs, are struggling with keeping a roof over your head, and the kids need new shoes, it becomes a challenge to seek the truth, even though you know the report Brian Williams just delivered is fabricated and it's a piece of fantasy. There's almost no truth to be found in the American mainstream media. He said almost no truth, and I had to think about that for a second. Is there even a smidgen of truth? And honestly, I don't know anymore. I don't know that there's any truth. I think it's all propaganda. The only truth you get is like, there was an accident on I-75 today, like a little quick blur. But you're not going to hear that on CNN. That'll be, Bay News 9, Tampa, Florida. Not CNN. CNN's not covering a traffic jam, down Highway 60 in Brandon, Florida. No. Only thing you get out of the mainstream media is pure propaganda. One of the best ways to understand what is happening today in places like Syria, Ukraine, or the Middle East is to take a step back and see what history has shown. Most all situations in the human experience have its roots in the past. As Mark Twain said, history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. That certainly applies to the ever-encroaching American police state, the unfolding war in Syria, Ukraine, and the Middle East. Does that sound like World War, or is it just me? History repeating or rhyming. What has happened over the past several years in places like Iraq, Libya, and Syria have roots in the late 1990s. The Project for a New American Century, or PNAC, a think tank, founded by, you guessed it, Dick Cheney, one of the most diehard neocons the world has ever seen, developed a plan to invade, that's right, invade, 7 countries in 5 years. Their plan is taking longer than originally thought, but I am not sure if Russian and Chinese resistance was part of that calculation. The development of Al-Qaeda that has somehow morphed into ISIS, don't forget the Taliban, got the Taliban too, has not gone as planned either. ISIS appears to be morphing into their own entity that the CIA is having a hard time controlling. The rogue band of mercenaries are going rogue in a way that was not foreseen. And Dr. Roberts, or Paul Craig Roberts, describes the evolution of the deep state and how the neocons have a stranglehold on the American political process that is hard to shake. These psychopathic warmongers are not concerned with anything except power, bloodlust, and their own sense of destiny. The tapestry that Dr. Roberts weaves begins with President Nixon, the Vietnam War, and winds its way through the latest meeting between President Putin and Secretary of State John Kerry. The picture is clear and details how we have arrived at the brink of nuclear annihilation. The three-part series is not to be missed. To get the whole picture, you need to listen all the way through. It was intentionally broken into smaller pieces to allow the info to sink in. I'm going to link this page in my video description so that you can, in fact, watch parts 1, 2, and 3. Again, this guy is a former official. I don't care if it was with Reagan or whoever. It doesn't matter. He was there. He was on the inside. He knows what's going on. He knows what was then and what is now. And what is now isn't looking good. So then we can go right into our next door neighbor above us, the department above us, Canada. And it says, this is Canada's depression. Surging crime, soaring suicides, overwhelmed food banks, and the worst is yet to come. From what they say here, it's Zero Hedge. Back in March, we brought you Drugs, Prostitution, Violence, Plague, Oil Boom Towns Gone Bust, in which we detailed the plight of towns like Sydney and Bainville, Montana, where the slump in oil revenue has made it all but impossible for local authorities to cope with surging crime rates that some attribute to the influx of workers the communities experienced in the good old days of high crude prices. The problem, apparently, was that despite the dramatic slump in oil, companies hadn't yet begun to cut jobs or slash capex, and so officials were left with less money to put towards policing their growing populations. As dangerous as it may be for small towns to experience exponential growth in what the Washington Post described as highly paid oil workers living in sprawling man camps with limited spending opportunities, what's even more dangerous is the prospect that suddenly the majority of those workers will be jobless. Highly paid oil workers living in sprawling man camps. I was thinking of that. The cartoon is actually done in the 60s. Akuma Matata, Bare Necessities. Man cub. Highly paid oil workers living in sprawling man camps. I wonder if there's any man cubs around. Or if it said highly paid oil workers. So this would make more sense what I'm about to say if they weren't highly paid. Because if they're highly paid, you could have a house in a man cave. But if you're not quite highly paid, or as highly paid, you might have a house and can't quite afford a nice man cave. So maybe you can build something in the backyard we'll call a man camp. How about that? So it says that is, if there's anything that's more conducive to raising the crime rate than legions of highly paid young men living in small towns with limited spending opportunities, it's legions of formerly highly paid young men stuck in small towns with limited job opportunities. With that in mind, America can look north to Calgary for a preview of what's in store for America's oil boom towns. Although Alberta's largest city bears little resemblance to Sydney and Bainville, the three do have one thing in common, and that's oil. Calgary boasted one of the lowest jobless rates in Canada as crude prices rose over $100 a barrel, but it's now reeling after a global glut pushed prices down by 2/3, as Bloomberg notes. Alberta's real GDP, moving on I should say, is expected to expand in 2015, but at a much slower pace of 0.6%. This is down from the second quarter forecast of 2.8%. Provincial authorities wrote in March in their quarterly fiscal update. That underscores just how significant the swift decline in crude prices is for the province. Since then, the government's projection of 2015 GDP has fallen by a full percentage point. Oil is down unexpectedly. All right, there's that word. How about that? As the economy is now expected to contract by 0.6%. Lower oil prices are weighing in on production and exports, of course. One guy commented, Kevin Mulligan, 61, was among Stampede workers, which I guess is the company, who got the Tuesday boot, he said. The former park maintenance manager, 6 years from retirement, is helping his wife with a Christmas wreath-making side business to supplement severance payments while job hunting. He said, my new job is finding a job. Pretty interesting. So I wonder if they cook their books up north. I mean, it's easy to fork, oh yeah, we're going to be strong and everything's good. And then all of a sudden, something like commodities prices fall, and along with it, massively oil. Which makes me think, like Lindsay said, back in 2008, when he correctly called the top of $150 barrel oil, and while it was topping, came out and said it's going down to about $50 a barrel in the next by the end of the year, beginning of next year. And it happened. And what he was told was that they're going to try and bankrupt all these oil-producing nations over there in the Middle East. They can't survive. They brought their economies up over from third world status to essentially first world. And now they rely heavily on these prices above, I thought at the time, he said $70 or $80 a barrel was the absolute minimum that they would be able to survive on. And we brought it down to 50 and then 40. So since, like Paul Craig Robert said, we're supposed to be going to all these Middle East nations, just like Lindsey Williams also said, we're going to go through all of them, then we're going to end up in Saudi Arabia. We got stopped in Syria this whole time, and now with the meeting with John Kerry and Putin, or his advisor, Assad no longer has to go. Thought he had to go. No, I didn't have to go anymore. Oh, our ally Turkey, go ahead and exit Iraq. We're good. So, to me, they're still stopped. That means one of two things. One, oil prices will remain low and may even go lower to absolutely try and crush the oil-producing countries of the world, to make them all go into a depression, and then we can join them and say, oh, well, since we're all in this, let's all agree to start a new world order currency. Or B, or two, is we may be facing another 9/11 type of event, in which at that point we just force our way into the Middle East. We don't care what Putin says, we don't care what anyone says, we just got attacked, we got to go handle business, and we're going full steam ahead. And again, history, that's pretty probable, I should say. It's a highly probable outcome, I believe. As sad as that is to say. But it just goes to show you, two first world countries, Canada and the U.S., both facing problems, both faking the numbers as much as we can. So it's your daily dose of daily news, to keep you going in the morning. So any of you, back in the day, some people might have been like, I don't like this job anymore. I don't feel like working all these hours they keep giving me. I'm going to go find something else. If your mindset is still back there, you need to get out of that mindset and say, whatever the hell job I've got, I'm keeping. I don't care if they run me like a slave, because I can see what's coming. And if I leave now, thinking I'll find something else, I might not. And then if I get hit with some kind of economic problems, I'll be in big trouble. Suck up your pride and stick with it for the time being. Take care.